Galactic Council tested Earth's limits, they found none. The document was 400 pages long and paragraph 41 was trying to take Earth's future. I found it at 3 in the morning, ship time, in the galley of the transit vessel, eating rehydrated jollof rice that tasted like cardboard soaked in regret. The convocation was visible through the porthole, a structure so enormous it had its own gravitational personality, orbiting a dying star like it needed the warmth. I had been staring at it for 12 days. I stopped staring at things that were too big a long time ago. Things that are too big are trying to tell you something, and what they are saying is never good. My name is Yara Osei. 38 years old. Lagos raised, Houston trained, and currently the only human being within 11 light years who had read the ceremonial integration document from cover to cover. That last part was apparently unusual. The VEL representative who handed it to me, his name rendered in English as something like Speaker Oren, had looked at me with what I later understood was surprise when I asked for the original language version alongside the translation. It is largely ceremonial, he had said, his voice carrying that harmonic undertone all VEL used, like a cello being played in the next room. I am sure it is, I said. I read it anyway. Paragraph 41. Let me tell you what paragraph 41 said, in plain terms, because the document itself dressed it in 30 layers of diplomatic vocabulary that smelled like old curtains. It said Earth was required to transfer autonomous military command authority to the Galactic Council for a provisional integration period of 30 standard years. It used the word invited 4 times in that single paragraph. An invitation delivered at the end of a 400-page document designed to exhaust the reader before they reached it. 30 years. I read it again. Then once more. The jollof rice went cold. The thing about being humanity's first appointed galactic liaison is that nobody trained you for it because there was no training. Owen Clark back at Mission Control had told me before I left, "You are writing the manual, Yara. Try not to make it a tragedy." Owen had a talent for understatement that I found either comforting or infuriating depending on the hour. At 3 in the morning, it was infuriating. I put down the rice. I pulled my tablet closer. I opened a new document and I made a list. Not a list of responses. Not a list of objections. A list of facts, because facts were the only currency that did not depreciate in unfamiliar rooms. Fact 1, the clause was legal under the Council's own framework, technically. Fact 2, it had been buried deliberately, the document's structure made that obvious to anyone with the patience to map it. Fact 3, Earth had not been consulted, warned, or asked. We had been presented. Fact 4, I was 12 days from home with no reinforcements and no backup authority beyond what my own judgment could carry. Fact 5, I had better judgment than most rooms I walked into. I sent one encrypted message back to Earth. 14 words. Then I went to sleep, because panic is a resource drain and I had a meeting in 5 hours. The convocation's interior was the kind of beautiful that makes you keep your hand on your bag. Living architecture, the VEL built their structures the way humans grew coral reefs, over centuries, layer on layer, and the result was walls that breathed slightly and corridors that curved in directions geometry did not fully endorse. Every surface had a faint luminescence. The air tasted clean in a way that felt engineered, because it was. Speaker Oren met me in what my briefing materials called the Chamber of Opening Accord. A good name. Rooms named after agreement are rooms designed to make you agree. He was tall, the VEL ran tall, 7 feet minimum, bodies built like they had been stretched gently over a long period of time, skin with a faint iridescence that caught light differently depending on angle. His harmonics, even in neutral conversation, had the quality of music played in a minor key. Lovely. I kept my face neutral the way you keep your face neutral when someone is pointing something at you. "Commander Osei," he said. "We are glad you have arrived. The integration process is a moment of historic significance." "It is," I said. "I hope the ceremonial documentation was not too burdensome." "Not at all," I said. "I read it all. Including paragraph 41. The harmonics shifted. Not dramatically, the VEL were not dramatic by nature. But there was a change in the undertone, something that dropped half a step. "That section addresses a standard procedural arrangement," Oren said. "It addresses command authority over Earth's military assets for 30 years, I said. "Which is not standard for us, and which we were not consulted on prior to the document's delivery. It is the integration protocol. All member candidates receive the same terms. I am sure they do, I said. Earth declines paragraph 41. I said it the way you say a meeting is rescheduled. Flat. Factual. Final. Orin's harmonics did something that none of my translation equipment had a designation for. It was not anger. It was not confusion. It was something that lived between those two things, in a register that had clearly not been assigned a word because no one had expected to need it. Commander Osei, he said, after a pause that I let sit exactly as long as it needed to. This is a matter of considerable. I understand, I said. Earth's formal response will be submitted in writing by end of day, per the Council's own procedural requirements under Article 9 of the Liaison Framework. I had found Article 9 at about 2:30 in the morning, right before paragraph 41. We look forward to continuing the integration discussions on the remaining 399 pages of the document. I stood, because the meeting was over. He did not stand. The harmonics were still doing the thing without a name. I walked back through the breathing corridors, past walls that glowed softly, through air that tasted like someone had optimized it for comfort. I found my assigned quarters, nicer than expected, which told me something about how they had planned for this visit. You do not give someone a better room unless you need them in a particular mood. I sat down. I thought about Kofi for exactly 4 seconds, the way you press a bruise to confirm it still hurts. Then I opened my tablet, wrote Earth's formal response to paragraph 41, and submitted it at 11 minutes past 9. The response was 6 sentences long. Courteous. Precise. Immovable. When Nadia Voss's voice came through on the encrypted channel from Houston 2 hours later, I could hear her trying not to sound worried. The Council's advisory team has been in emergency session since your message, she said. Owen wants to know if you need extraction protocols activated. Tell Owen I need another pack of that jollof mix, I said. The one they gave me here tastes like something went wrong in manufacturing. Silence on the line. Yara. I am fine, Nadia, I said. We declined paragraph 41. Now we wait and see what kind of organization they actually are. And if they push back. Then we find out what pushing back looks like from 11 light years away, I said. And we plan accordingly. The convocation rotated slowly outside my window, luminous and enormous against the dark. Beautiful the way things built to last forever are beautiful, with a confidence that edges into arrogance. I went back to reading the document. Pages 42 through 400 were going to tell me everything I needed to know. The embargo started quietly. That was the thing nobody told you about the end of the world, it does not arrive with noise. It arrives in a memo. The memo came through official channels on a Tuesday, formatted in the Council's standard diplomatic style, which meant it was 14 paragraphs long and said what it needed to say in the last 2 sentences. Earth's application for full integration was under review. Pending review, all Council-affiliated trade routes, communication relays, and technology exchange agreements were suspended. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Owen and Nadia with one line attached. This is what paragraph 41 was protecting us from. Back on Earth, I had been recalled, which the Council would interpret as retreat and which was actually something else entirely. The word suspended hit like a delayed charge. Not an explosion. A collapse. Slow, structural, the kind of damage that does not announce itself. The first 6 months were the kind of hard that does not make good stories. No dramatic moments. No rallying speech. Just the grinding, unglamorous work of recalculating every system that had been quietly dependent on Council infrastructure, which turned out to be more systems than anyone had mapped clearly. Medical supply chains that used Council relay stations. Agricultural data feeds that ran through shared satellites. Navigation beacons for deep space shipping lanes that had been Council-maintained for decades, because we had handed that over during the first contact goodwill period and nobody had kept the original systems running because why would you maintain a backup when the main line was working fine? I spent those 6 months in a converted conference room in Houston with Leon Marsh, military logistics advisor, 17 years of planning for scenarios that were not supposed to happen, and Claire Adeyemi, who had been Earth's secondary diplomatic liaison and who had a mind that organized information the way rivers organize water, finding channels for everything without visible effort. Do we have a dependency map? I asked on day 3. We have the start of one, Claire said. She pulled it up on the wall screen. It looked like the inside of a badly managed server. This is a problem, Leon said. This is a starting point, I said. We worked backwards from the worst cases. Which shortages would become critical fastest? Which populations were most exposed? Which alternatives existed, even theoretical ones, even ones that required dusting off equipment that had been in storage for 20 years? The answer, it turned out, was that we had more alternatives than we had been using, because the council infrastructure had been cheaper and faster, so human ingenuity had atrophied slightly in its shadow. The embargo was, in the most brutal possible way, a reminder that we knew how to do this. We had done this for most of our history. Shortage, adaptation, solution. It was not new. It was ancestral. Nadia coordinated the engineering response from a facility outside Nairobi. I called her every 3 days. She sounded progressively less panicked as the months passed, which was the sound of someone finding traction in a bad situation. The navigation beacon problem is solved, she told me at month 4. Better than solved. Leon's team found a frequency configuration that is actually more precise than what the council was running. We are filing the technical specs. Good, I said. And the agricultural feeds, we built a replacement network in 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Yara. It took them 3 years to build the original. Because we had the original as a blueprint, I said. And because we had no choice. Limitation as innovation, she said. That is a nicer way to put it than how I have been saying it, I said. The medical supply situation was harder. That one had genuine cost. There were shortages, there were patients who did not receive what they needed on schedule, and I will not dress that up in language that makes it sound like an acceptable part of a process. It was not acceptable. It was the damage that the council's action caused, and I catalogued every case with the intention of presenting it as evidence at a time of my choosing. By month 8, the shortages had been rerouted through independent channels that Earth had rebuilt from older frameworks. Not perfectly. Not without cost. But the bleeding had stopped. Something else happened around month 8 that I had not fully anticipated. People stopped waiting to be told what to do and started solving the problems that were directly in front of them. Not because they were instructed to. Because that is what humans do when the comfortable option is removed. The comfortable option had been removed. What remained was the older option, the original operating system, the one that had gotten the species from caves to orbit before anyone else arrived to offer shortcuts. By month 12, I was building a different kind of list than the one I had made in the galley at 3 in the morning. This list was a record. A formal accounting. Every system Earth had rebuilt. Every improvement made under pressure that exceeded the original council-provided version. Every case file from the medical shortage period, documented and sourced and dated. The council sent an observer vessel at month 14. I assumed they expected to find us scrambling, or fractured, or quietly building a case for readmission on whatever terms they offered. The observer's name translated approximately as Rel. A species I had not encountered before, compact, with eyes that moved independently, giving the impression of constant surveillance without the effort. Rel's team spent 3 weeks on Earth, reviewing infrastructure, meeting with department heads, taking measurements. I gave them full access. Owen thought that was either very clever or very bold. I told him it was neither. It was the correct response when you have nothing to hide. At the end of week 3, I met with Rel in the same conference room where Claire and Leon and I had spent 6 months rebuilding things. The dependency map was still on the wall screen, updated now to show what had been replaced, rebuilt, and in some cases made redundant entirely. Rel's eyes moved across the screen for a long time. Your communication relay network, Rel said through the translation unit. It is operating at a higher efficiency rate than the council standard version. Yes, I said. By approximately 14%. 17, I said. Claire's team finalized the latest calibration 2 days ago. Rel's eyes moved to me. Both of them, simultaneously, which I had learned was the equivalent of direct and full attention in their species. This was not the expected outcome, Rel said. I had been preparing for this moment for 3 months. Not because I needed to think about what I wanted to say, but because I wanted to make sure I said exactly what needed to be said and nothing more. "We know," I said. "REL filed the report with the Council." I do not know exactly what it said. But the Council's communication channels reopened 48 hours later, with a request for resumed integration discussions. I made Owen write the acknowledgement. I was busy updating the evidence file for the medical shortage cases. Some things do not get filed away just because the situation improves. Some things are kept, because keeping them is the only honest thing to do. That was a lesson the Council was going to learn about us eventually. I preferred they learn it on my timeline rather than theirs. Claire called the evening after REL's vessel departed. She sounded like she had been holding a breath for 14 months and had only just released it. "Do you think they understand what happened here?" she asked. "They understand the numbers," I said. "They are still working on the rest of it." "What is the rest of it?" I looked at the dependency map still glowing on the screen. All those rebuilt lines. All those rerouted channels. Every gap that had been filled not by waiting but by working. "The rest of it," I said, "is that we were not afraid of the dark. We just turned the lights back on ourselves." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Owen is going to frame that," she said. "Tell him not to," I said. "We have more work to do." The Croth situation started the same way everything in the galactic political world started, with a document. 3 months after REL's visit, 3 months after the Council's communication channels reopened and everyone on Earth started breathing again, a series of reports came through from the frontier settlements. The kind of frontier that takes 6 months to reach by standard transport, small colonies on the edge of explored space, mostly resource extraction operations and research stations, communities of a few thousand people each who had chosen the far edge because they preferred distance from the complicated center. The reports described Croth vessels. The Croth were known to the Council as a border civilization, a species tolerated at the margins, regarded as territorial but manageable, the way you regard a dog that has bitten someone twice as manageable if you keep it on a shorter rope. The Croth had been pushing closer to human frontier settlements for about 6 months. Small moves at first. A supply drone intercepted here. A communication relay disrupted there. The kind of pressure that tests what you do when it is not quite bad enough to call it an attack. Then 3 settlements went quiet on the same day. I was back on the convocation when the reports came in. I had been restationed there after the embargo review, given a room with a better view and a title with more syllables. The room with a better view meant they were concerned about me. More syllables in the title meant they wanted me to feel important enough to be manageable. Leon sent me the full intelligence package. I read it in the convocation's version of a dining area, which had no jollof rice of any quality but did have something that tasted faintly of citrus if you did not think about it too hard. 3 settlements. Combined population, 11,412 people. Dark for 72 hours. The Council offered mediation. I received the formal mediation offer from Speaker Oren in writing, which meant they did not want to watch my face when they made it. The letter was sympathetic in the way that things written by committee are sympathetic, technically accurate in its expression of concern but carrying the emotional warmth of a maintenance notification. I read the letter. I placed it on the desk. I did not respond to it. Because Earth had not asked for mediation. Leon's update came through 6 hours after I received Oren's letter. The response had already begun. I want to be precise about what that meant, because the word response is doing significant work in that sentence. Earth's military planners had been watching the Croth pressure campaign for the full 6 months it had been building. They had not been waiting for something to happen. They had been preparing for exactly what happened, with the specific and detailed patience of people who understand that the question is not whether but when. When the 3 settlements went dark, the preparation became action. It took 3 weeks. Not broad retaliation. Not the kind of wide response that paints a target across a whole civilization. Something that had a different quality entirely, the quality of a response that knows exactly what it is addressing and approaches each element with a directness that left nothing unaddressed and nothing extra. Croth military assets in frontier range, gone. Every one. Supply lines feeding those assets, severed. Communication infrastructure supporting the pressure campaign, removed. No civilian casualties. That last part requires careful explanation. It was not restraint in the sense of holding back from something worse. It was targeting capability. Earth's military technology, which the Council had never asked to see a full inventory of because they had assumed they understood its scope, had the precision to choose. Every action addressed a military asset. Nothing else was touched. 11,412 people came back online. All of them. The Croth filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Council within 48 hours. I received my summons to the Council's formal session at approximately the same time. Leon sent me a message that read, "Everything we hit was a military target. We have documentation on all of it." I wrote back, "Good. I will need it printed." The formal session was in a chamber I had not been in before, smaller than the chamber of opening accord, which I understood was deliberate. Smaller rooms suggest smaller problems. The Council was trying to scale this down before it grew larger than they could manage. Speaker Oren was present. So were 4 other Council representatives, which meant this was serious enough for a quorum but controlled enough that they had not called a full assembly. The Croth had a representative present via holographic transmission, which resolved in a corner of the room at about half life size. "Commander Osei," Oren began. His harmonics were careful. "Earth's response to the frontier situation has created a diplomatic complication. Earth's response to the frontier situation resolved the frontier situation," I said. "The scale of the response. I have the documentation here," I said. I placed Leon's printed report on the table. Every asset targeted was a military asset engaged in active operations against civilian settlements. Every action taken was within the bounds of self-defense as defined under 17 Council treaties. I had found those treaties the same night I found Article 9. I had been keeping that file for a long time. I would be glad to go through them one by one if there is any item in question. The Croth representative's holographic form made a sound that my translator handled as deep frustration. Oren's harmonics shifted. "The concern," he said carefully, "is the capability demonstrated. The precision of the response suggests a level of competence." I offered. Nobody in the room made a sound. "Commander Osei," Oren said. "You understand the Council's position. I understand the Council is concerned that Earth's military capability is more developed than the Council's assessments indicated," I said. "I understand the Croth expected a response that was easier to categorize. I understand that what happened instead was a response that was legally precise, tactically complete, and operationally clean. And I understand that this is somehow more uncomfortable for everyone than if we had been less careful about it." I paused. "What I would like to understand," I said, "is what the ceiling of Earth's self-defense rights is under Council law." Oren looked at me. His harmonics went very quiet. "Because I have read the treaties," I said. "All of them. And as far as I can determine, there is not one." The room was doing something I had never heard a room do before. Not a sound. A quality of silence that had weight. "That is a complex question," Oren said. "It is actually quite a simple question," I said. "The complexity is in the answer." The session ended without a formal resolution, which was itself a resolution of a kind. The Croth complaint was logged. Earth's documentation was filed. The 17 treaties stood exactly where they had always stood. I walked out through the convocation's breathing corridors and went back to my room with the good view. I sat by the window and looked at the dying star the structure orbited. Leon called from Houston. "How did it go?" "They found out what we can do," I said. And now they have to decide what to do with that information," I said. "What do you think they will do?" I thought about the room's silence. The weight of it. "I think they are going to look at us differently from now on," I said. "I think they already are." I was right about that. I just did not know yet what that would mean. I met Sheen in a maintenance corridor at 4 in the morning, which should have told me everything I needed to know about what kind of conversation it was going to be. Maintenance corridors in the convocation smelled like ozone and age. The structure was centuries old in its oldest sections, and the maintenance level ran through those sections like a circulatory system through old bones. The lighting was functional rather than designed, flat, white, honest in the way that expensive light was not. Sheen was a Vel, but older than any Vel I had encountered. The iridescence that made younger Vel look like they had captured light under their skin had faded in Sheen to something more muted, like light seen through old glass. Their harmonics carried a quality that my translator kept rendering in a category I had never seen it used before: residual resonance. I did not ask what that meant. The sound itself told me. They were the Vel's senior archivist. I found that out afterward. During the meeting, they introduced themselves only as someone with documents I needed to see. The documents were physical. Printed, bound, and old enough that the binding had started to separate at the edges. The Vel printed important things. They said digital copies had edges that could be altered. Physical copies had edges that showed their age honestly. Sheen placed the documents on a flat service panel between us without speaking, then stepped back, as if the documents themselves needed room. I looked at the cover. The symbol there was one I had not encountered in any of my briefing materials. It looked like a horizon line with something cutting through it at an angle, a shape moving toward a fixed line, closing the distance. What does this translate to? I asked. The most accurate English rendering, Sheen said, harmonics carrying that residual quality, would be the horizon that moves. I opened the documents. What I read in the next 2 hours reorganized the architecture of everything I had understood about the Galactic Council since I first stepped onto the convocation. The Council was old. Not in the way I had understood old, not in the way of institutions that accumulate authority over centuries. Old in the way of an organization built in response to something. The way defensive walls are old. The way structures built for survival are old. You build them because the alternative was considered and rejected. The horizon that moves had been documented for the first time approximately 200 years ago in Council historical records. No, not documented. Detected. There was a difference. Documentation implied something you could describe fully. Detection implied something that showed only edges, only the shape of what was missing. 8 galactic civilizations had encountered it before the Council existed. 8 civilizations that had, in the records and histories of the current galactic community, achieved interstellar travel, built structures, established cultures complex enough to leave evidence. 8 civilizations that were no longer present in any form that communicated, responded, or appeared to continue. Not destroyed. That word implied wreckage. There was no wreckage. There was absence where presence had been. The records of neighboring civilizations that had observed the process described it as a conversion, not of physical matter but of something harder to name. The archive description from the Vel's own records used a word that translated approximately as the quality of wanting to continue. The 8 civilizations had stopped wanting to continue. Something had removed that quality from them. What remained was not death in any recognizable form. It was something quieter. Something that persisted without purpose, like a machine left running with no task and no operator. The Council had been tracking the horizon that moves for 2 centuries. Measuring its approach. Mapping the angle of its trajectory through occupied space. Building models. Adjusting models. Building entirely new models when the old ones proved inadequate. The trajectory, on the most recent calculations, placed its arrival in explored space within the next 40 to 80 years. I turned pages. My hands were steady. I noted that my hands were steady and stored that observation somewhere separate from the reading. The testing protocol was in the 3rd section. I had suspected the testing was deliberate. Reading the formal documentation of its deliberateness was different from suspecting it. It had a different weight. The kind of weight that sits in your chest rather than in your head. The Council had developed the protocol after analyzing the 8 lost civilizations and comparing them to the 12 that had survived contact with the horizon at its edges. The 12 survivors shared characteristics that the 8 did not. The characteristics were difficult to define in formal terms, which was why the Council had built the tests rather than simply measuring for them directly. The embargo had been the first test. What it measured was not resilience in the technical sense. It measured whether a civilization, cut off from comfort and the familiar systems it had come to depend on, would fracture along its internal lines or whether it would route around the damage and keep moving. 7 species had asked for readmission. 3 had fractured. 1 had gone quiet in a way that the report described without elaboration, and the absence of elaboration told me more than any explanation would have. The Croth situation had been the second test. What it measured was the nature of a civilization's relationship with conflict. Not whether they would engage in it. Whether they had developed the kind of precision that distinguished between what needed addressing and what did not. The horizon that moves was, in every documented case, drawn toward broad consuming responses, toward the kind of reaction that escalated past its own purpose. Precision did not feed it. Precision was, by all available evidence, the closest thing to a defense the Council's researchers had ever identified. The 8 lost civilizations had all, in the period before their conversion, produced conflict responses that were wide, consuming, and self-escalating. The pattern was consistent enough across 8 separate cases that the Council had built an evaluation for it. I sat with all of this. 4 seconds. I pressed the bruise. Kofi had been 12 years old during the first contact blackout of 2041. The communication systems had gone down across 2 continents. The hospitals had not been prepared for the power rerouting that followed. He had been in a hospital. He had been there for a routine procedure that became something else in the dark. I had been 17, in a different city. I had not known for 6 days. 4 seconds. Then I moved on. How long? I asked Sheen. The current modeling suggests 40 to 60 years before contact with the outermost settled systems, Sheen said. Their harmonics carried something my translator had flagged as afraid and relieved in equal parts, which seemed like an impossible combination until I thought about what it felt like to carry a secret for a very long time and finally set it down. The Council has known this for 200 years, I said. The current Council has known for 140, Sheen said. The prior Council had partial data and chose not to act on it formally. Why are you showing me this now? Because Earth passed all 3 tests, Sheen said. No civilization has done that. In the full historical record. Not one. I looked at the symbol on the cover again. The horizon line with the shape moving toward it. There is a 3rd test mentioned here, I said. The test of understanding. Yes. What does passing it require? Understanding, Sheen said, in a tone that suggested the answer was exactly that simple and exactly that difficult simultaneously. A civilization that is shown the true nature of the situation and responds with clear thought rather than paralysis or recklessness. That is the 3rd test. So this meeting is the 3rd test. Sheen's harmonics shifted. Something that, after a moment, resolved into what I could only describe as respect. The test is how you leave this corridor, they said. I looked at the documents again. 200 years of data. 8 lost civilizations. 40 years, at minimum, before the outermost settlements would need to face something that had ended 8 other civilizations without leaving a single piece of wreckage. 40 years was not very long. It was also enough time to do a great deal, if you started immediately and did not waste any of it. The Council will call a full session, I said. They will present this formally. They intend to, Sheen said. Within the month. They were waiting for the results of the 3rd test. They expect Earth to accept whatever role they assign us, I said. Sheen did not answer. That was itself an answer. The Council has been running this selection process for 200 years, I said. Managing it. Deciding which civilizations get the tests and what form the tests take. Running the entire protocol without telling any of the participants what they were actually being evaluated for or why. Yes, Sheen said. And they never asked anyone, I said. They just presented. The corridor was very quiet. The ozone smell of old infrastructure. The flat, honest light. The Council has always operated on the belief that the situation's urgency justified the methodology, Sheen said carefully. The situation is urgent, I said. The methodology is still what it is. I closed the documents. I placed them neatly on the service panel. Thank you, I said to Sheen. Their harmonics carried that residual quality. Like light through old glass, describing something that had lasted. What will you do? They asked. I thought about Owen's voice after paragraph 41. I thought about Claire's dependency map with all its rebuilt lines. I thought about Leon's printed report and the 17 treaties found at 2:30 in the morning. I thought about Nadia's voice growing steadier with each passing month, finding traction in a situation designed to produce the opposite. I am going to prepare for the session, I said. And I am going to bring a document. I walked back through the maintenance corridor, past the old bones of the convocation, back toward the section where the light was designed for comfort. My hands were still steady. I had a month. That was enough. The full council session was called on a morning when the dying star outside the convocation was at its closest orbital point, filling the observation panels with an amber light that hit every surface at an angle that made everything look slightly on fire. I noticed this on the way to the chamber and filed it away as either meaningful or coincidental and kept walking, because dwelling on atmosphere is something you do when you have spare time, and I did not. I had been preparing for 23 days. Not preparing in the sense of rehearsing what to say. Preparing in the specific sense of building a document that was legally exact, factually complete, and structured so that every single element was grounded in the Council's own frameworks, their own treaties, their own recorded precedents. If they were going to object to anything in it, they would have to object to their own work. I found that a useful architecture. Claire had contributed the legal sections, working from Houston on a 12-hour communication delay. Leon had written the military assessment portions. Nadia had audited every technical claim. Owen had read the complete document twice and told me it was either going to work or it was going to be the most coherent failure in human history, and either way he was proud of it. I had printed it. Because the Vel were right about physical copies. The chamber of full assembly was the largest interior space in the convocation. I had seen it once before, briefly, during the orientation tour on my first visit, a vast circular room with tiered seating arranged around a central floor, designed so that every seat had a clear line of sight to the center and so that anyone standing at the center could be seen from every direction at once. The acoustics were perfect in the way that required centuries of deliberate refinement. Every species. The full council. The harmonics alone, even in low conversation as I entered, were layered to the point where they stopped being sound and became atmosphere. The air felt dense with it. I had been in big rooms before. This was the biggest room. I took my position at the center floor. One person. One document, placed on the small podium in front of me. Speaker Oren began the session from the high tier, his harmonics carrying across the chamber with no apparent effort. The formal introduction took 12 minutes. The presentation of the situation, the horizon that moves, the 200 years of tracking data, the 8 lost civilizations, the trajectory modeling, took 40 more. Holographic displays filled the upper air of the chamber with maps and calculations, and the symbol from the cover of Sheen's documents, rendered now in 3 dimensions and large enough to read from any seat in the room. I watched the representatives from other species as the information was presented. Some of them were hearing this for the first time. I watched what that looked like, the shift in posture, the stilling of motion, the particular quality of attention that arrives when something fundamentally changes the size of the world you thought you were living in. Speaker Oren concluded the data presentation and addressed the full chamber directly. Earth has demonstrated, through the evaluation process, capabilities and characteristics that position it uniquely among the civilizations of this council, he said. The council proposes that Earth accept a primary strategic role in the coordinated response. We would formalize this through an emergency integration agreement, to be executed with urgency given the timeline. He looked at me. The chamber was quiet the way well-designed rooms are quiet, everything absorbed, nothing reflecting back. Commander Osei, he said. On behalf of the Galactic Council, we extend this role to Earth with full recognition of Earth's demonstrated qualities. We ask for Earth's acceptance. I looked at him for a moment. Then I placed my hand on the document. I have brought Earth's response, I said. I will read it. I opened the document and I read it aloud. Not fast. Not performed, not theatrical. Clearly. The way you read a legal instrument, because every word in it matters and speed would cost meaning. The document's first section established context. It acknowledged the threat. It acknowledged the testing process. It acknowledged Earth's results in that process. It acknowledged the urgency of the timeline. All of that in plain language, factual and undecorated. Then the conditions began. Condition 1, Earth requested full council membership with equal voting rights, effective immediately upon signing, not after a provisional period, and not subject to any integration clause requiring military command transfer. The membership would be full or it would not proceed. Condition 2, retroactive compensation for the economic costs of the embargo period. The document included a figure. The figure was based on exact calculations of infrastructure reconstruction costs, trade disruption losses, and the medical shortage cases, every case, individually documented in the appendix, which ran to 240 pages. The figure was large. It was also exactly correct. Condition 3. Formal prosecution of the authorization of cross-frontier operations through the Council's own legal framework. Not managed quietly in a closed session. Through the framework, on the record, visible. Condition 4. Open and unrestricted access to all Council archives, including the complete records of the 8 lost civilizations. Every document, without classification restrictions, available to Earth's research and planning teams from the moment of signing. Condition 5. A joint strategy committee for the response to the horizon that moves, with equal representation across all Council species, not a committee structured so that Earth served in a role that others had designed for it. Condition 6. A binding commitment that no Council member civilization would be subjected to the testing protocol without their knowledge or consent going forward. The protocol could continue to exist as a voluntary evaluation for candidate civilizations. It would never be used covertly again. Condition 7. I paused before reading Condition 7. Not for dramatic effect. Because the wording had taken me 3 days to get exactly right and I wanted to deliver it correctly. Condition 7. A formal entry in the Galactic record acknowledging that Earth was never asked. That Earth was tested without informed consent, pressured through economic isolation without explanation, and had its frontier settlements exposed to authorized external operations as part of an evaluation that Earth had not agreed to participate in. The record entry would not be filed in an archive accessible only to researchers. It would be in the opening section of the Council's public history, readable by every civilization the Council encountered from that point forward. Not as an accusation. As a fact. A permanent, accurate, unedited fact. I closed the document. The chamber was doing something I had no prior reference for. A sound that was not quite sound, the combined harmonics of 47 species all processing the same information at the same moment, producing something that lived at the very edge of hearing, in the frequency where hearing and feeling are the same. I waited. A representative from a species I had met only once before, small, with a translator unit that tended to run half a second behind the conversation, leaned forward in their seat. Commander Osei, they said, when their translator caught up. What if the Council declines these conditions? I had prepared for this question. I had thought about how to answer it. I had written several versions of the answer and removed all of them except one. I looked at the representative. Then you face what is coming without us, I said. And you have already run the models on what that outcome looks like. I did not say it with anger. I did not say it with any kind of performance in my voice. I said it the way you state a calculation whose result is not in dispute. The chamber returned to the quality of silence that had weight in it. Speaker Oren's harmonics moved across several registers in quick succession. Processing. I had spent enough time around Vel now to read harmonic shifts the way you eventually learn to read a face, not perfectly, but well enough to know the difference between calculating and deciding. The conditions proposed by Earth are, he began. Grounded entirely in Council law and precedent, I said. Every condition cites the relevant treaty or framework in the footnotes. The legal basis for each item is in the second appendix. I was thorough. More silence. A different kind this time. A representative from the Vel High Tier, not Oren, an older one I had not spoken to before, produced a harmonic that my translator flagged after a moment as acknowledgement of a point that cannot be refuted. The debate that followed lasted 4 hours. I stood at the center floor for all of it. Not because I was required to. Because leaving would have communicated uncertainty, and I was not uncertain. The debate was not, for the most part, about whether the conditions were reasonable. It was about whether accepting them would establish a precedent. I let that conversation run, because it needed to, and because the answer was visible to anyone willing to say it plainly. The precedent it would set was that civilizations joining the Council were treated as partners rather than as resources to be shaped and deployed. If that was a precedent the Council found uncomfortable, then the Council had accurately identified what was broken in its own history. Claire had written that framing. I had kept it verbatim. Condition 7 was the one that generated the most sustained debate. The Galactic record entry. The permanent acknowledgement. Several representatives argued that it was backward-looking, that it would damage relationships with existing member civilizations, that the moment called for unity and forward movement rather than accountability. I addressed this directly when Oren turned to me for a response. It is not backward-looking, I said. It is accurate. Accuracy about what has happened is the foundation of any functional partnership going forward. A record that omits the truth of how Earth was treated is not a record. It is a version of events that has been edited for the comfort of the people who created those events, and we have had enough of that kind of history. No one spoke for a long moment. I would also note, I said, that the 8 civilizations this council lost, the ones whose records are in the archive that Earth will now have access to, every one of them operated in partnerships built on incomplete information. What those civilizations were told, and what was true, were not always the same thing. I would suggest that the council has more than enough evidence on the cost of that particular approach. The harmonics in the chamber shifted again. Something that my translator, after several seconds, rendered as a point that lands differently than expected. The vote was called at the end of the 4th hour. 11 species voted in favor of Earth's conditions as written. 3 voted against. The conditions passed. The signing ceremony was brief and formal, the kind of ceremony that exists because some moments require a physical mark to confirm their reality. I signed on behalf of Earth. Oren signed on behalf of the Council. The document was dated, witnessed, and registered in the Council's permanent record. I walked out of the chamber of full assembly through corridors that breathed softly and glowed, past walls that had been growing for centuries, through air that tasted clean in a way someone had spent considerable effort perfecting. My quarters. The door closed behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed. The dying star outside the window had moved in its slow rotation, the amber morning light replaced now by something cooler, the star at distance, still burning, still holding its position against the dark with the particular confidence of things that have been doing this for a very long time. I thought about Kofi. Not briefly this time. I gave it the full space it had always deserved. His face. His voice. The way he laughed at things slightly before they were funny, because he saw where they were going ahead of everyone else. The 6 days of not knowing. The 30 seconds of knowing. Every year since, carrying both of those things at the same time without putting either one down. He would have had something to say about today. He always had something to say. Most of it would have made me laugh, and then made me feel guilty about laughing, and then made me laugh again. I thought, today I signed a document that will be in the Galactic record permanently. I thought, Kofi would have found that both impressive and completely ridiculous, and he would have said exactly that in a way that was entirely accurate on both counts. My communication device buzzed. Owen. It passed, I said before he could speak. A pause. Then, Claire is crying. Leon is pretending he is not. Nadia is already asking what the archive access timeline looks like. That sounds right, I said. Yara, Owen said. All 7 conditions. All 7. Another pause. A longer one. You know what this means, he said. It means there is a great deal of work ahead, I said. It means everything changes. Everything was already changing, I said. Now we have the right seat at the table when the decisions get made. I ended the call. I did not send 14 words to Earth this time. There was nothing that could be compressed to 14 words without losing something essential. Some moments need the full space and do not apologize for taking it. I wrote messages to Owen, to Claire, to Leon, to Nadia. What each of them had contributed. What it had built. What it would mean going forward. I am not sentimental in most contexts. But I know the difference between what deserves to be said now and what can wait. This did not wait. Then I closed the communication device and sat with the quiet. The convocation moved in its slow rotation around the dying star. The star held its position, burning down on its own schedule, indifferent to everything circling it, as it had been for billions of years before the structure arrived and would continue to be for billions more after the structure was gone. At the edge of mapped space, something was moving toward the light. We were already moving faster. Not because we had been asked to. Not because we had been evaluated and found sufficient. Because we had negotiated the terms. Because we had read paragraph 41. Because when someone presents you with a 400-page document designed to have you agree to something you should not agree to, the correct response is to read every page, find Article 9, and submit your own document in return. We had not been invited here. We had arrived anyway. The Council had spent 200 years looking for a civilization that would not break. They had found one that read the fine print. Outside the window, the dying star kept burning. We were just getting started.